Let's start the webinar. First of all, I would like to thank you all for accepting our invitation for the webinar today. The title of the webinar is Understanding the Impact of Real-World Evidence on Market Access in the year 2022. Actually, we are having a very good group of experts from the different aspects and from different multinational experiences, whether pharmaceutical or even from the artificial intelligence technology. So actually, our agenda today. Before introducing our speakers or the group of speakers, I would like to show you or share with you the agenda. So we'll start with Dr. Musad. After this introduction or short introduction, each speaker will introduce himself directly. So our first lecture will be the impact of real-world evidence on market access from medical perspectives. Then after that, Dr. Jihan will give us another picture of impact of real-world evidence on market access, but from another perspective, which is the health economic perspectives. Then Dr. Fawaz will give us a very good lecture about the value evidence and market access evolved. And finally, Dr. and Mr. Douglas will giving us a picture about using the anonymized electronic medical records data to develop real-world data generation and real-world evidence and real-time cohort models. So then we'll have 20 minutes of question and answer, so kindly be ready with your questions in order to make it more interactive during the last part of our session. So I will leave the floor now to Dr. Musad to start his first lecture. So I will stop sharing this part, and I will share with you the first topic by Musad.
Thank you, Dr. Omar. Do you hear me? Hello?
Yes, doctor.
Okay, so thank you very much, Dr. Omar. And first, I'd really like to welcome you all to this very important session, my dear colleagues and friends. And also I'd like to welcome our guest speakers, Dr. Jihan, Dr. Fawaz, and Mr. Drake, for this very important session, I believe. In fact, I'm especially happy to be part of this session by introducing this important subject, because I actually am witnessing now booming towards the area of real-world evidence. And in fact, this reminds me with some old days back in 1997 when we started promoting and launching the concept of good clinical practice and ICH-GCP. And now it became a reality and became a mandate. So I believe also the real-world evidence is going into this direction with all the harmonization and mandate. By introduction, I forgot to introduce myself. So my name is Musad Morsi, as just mentioned. I'm a physician by education and worked for the pharmaceutical companies, managing, clinical. So my background in the pharmaceutical companies was like clinical research, medical affairs. I worked in great pharmaceutical companies, namely Sanofi and Pfizer, where I had an access and information on very important subjects. One of them, of course, is real-world evidence. So my presentation today is going to be an introduction on the subject for our experts to actually give us more, in-depth information on this important subject. So these are the points that I'm going to just, quickly talk about the definition, what are the sources of the data, why it's important, what are the barriers and challenges, and what are the future steps and impact on patient access. So Okay, so there are many definitions for real-world evidence. The common important word is routine. So it's the real-world data is defined as data on patients' health status and or healthcare delivery in the real-world setting. So it must be a routine setting. They are derived from a number of sources and describe a heterogeneous patient population. So this is one major difference from the controlled clinical trials, where the patients are actually strictly controlled and all the conditions are strictly controlled. That's why you cannot generalize this is one of the limitations of randomized clinical trials, where you cannot generalize the outcome to the heterogeneous groups of patients. And then the analysis of the real world data, then you have this data, you analyze the data to get evidence, and then you take this evidence to generate insights, where through these insights you can actually understand what are the unmet needs, the pathways for different interventions, and what's the impact on patients and the economy. Next, please. Okay, so it's a very important, this subject is very important, and I just want to show you an evidence on the importance of the subject. Now you can see the regulators are heavily involved, and this is actually happening lately in the last 5 or 6 years. Before that, we did not hear a lot about real-world evidence. We know real-world evidence, but it was not that important. When the regulators and the whole world has identified the importance of this subject. Now, for instance, the FDA in the last 5 years started to develop guidance and frameworks promoting the establishment of programs to evaluate the potential use of real-world evidence. And also this, with the aim of supporting approval of new indications and also, safety post-approval study requirements. Meaning that, they have identified or have just, acknowledged the importance of this. The same in parallel to this, the EU is doing the same, China and Japan. So it's getting very important day after day. And again, if we look at this chart, the small chart down there, you can see this is the evolution of the real-world evidence studies. So in starting 1984, there was, very, very minimal number of studies, real-world evidence studies, and lately, as you can see, there is booming in the number of studies. This is PubMed showing on August last year that we have 2,200 studies on PubMed database only, and of course many others on different databases. Okay, but why the real-world evidence is that important? Because real-world evidence addresses important questions and concerns that are actually available at the level of clinical, the normal way of evaluating the disease and therapeutic effect based on randomized clinical trials. Because there are unaddressed concerns, mainly talking about the effectiveness versus efficacy, as you will see during the presentations, tolerability, and what's the value, and then heterogeneity in the treatment patterns. So these are questions that are not addressed in the clinical trial, controlled clinical trial setting. That's why there is a big need to understand that. So what is it going to bring to us when we use the real-world evidence and data? So by the real-world evidence, large data set, large number of patients actually gathered their information. We can support the clinical trial design. So you design now, you can design your clinical trial based on evidence that is generated from a large number of patients, from the disease that you are now capable of knowing what are the normal practice for the physicians, what are the side effects, what is the missing part, what can be surrogate endpoint when you are following, for instance, oncology study, and you may not have a lot of patients in certain indication, and then you probably will use the natural health history available on the real world. Then you can compare with, if you have a single arm study with small number of patients, then you can compare with the natural history. So again, it can address something like that. Yeah, okay, please back to the slide before. Okay. And then you can actually monitor the safety. When you do a clinical study, even of on 10, 13,000 patients, you know the safety profile of a product. But this is not enough. We've been faced, in many occasions where you launch a product, and then after that, by the post-marketing surveillance, then you identify that there's a big problem in the safety or big safety issue or something. Again, the real-world evidence allows us to monitor and assess the safety profile. You can also identify, for instance, in clinical trials, you can reach patients in rare, with rare indications, like Gaucher, for instance. You don't know where are those patients. If you have the criteria, then the criteria that actually can indicate that patient may have something like Gaucher, then you can, by actually searching for these criteria through a big database, you can identify, for instance, that there is, one patient in this governorate, 2 patients in the other. Then you can help patients, and you can, recruit the patients for your study, timely. That's why it's very important. So many others as well. It's really showing how much the real-world evidence is going to change the way that the healthcare, and clinical research is actually being managed now. Okay. So where can we get this, the real-world data? It's available in sources. Again, we're talking about routine. So routine collection of data on health, care, delivery or patient status. It's available in many resources. So mainly it's electronic medical records. When you have a hospital, institution with health records, that's why it's very important, it's an area of digitalization as we know. And I believe everybody is going digital, and very soon, most of the hospitals all over our region will be, using electronic medical health records, or at least we hope so. Again, we can also use disease, registries, claims, or even social media or mobile apps or the lab. Very important also the lab data. You can also use the lab data to have an idea on the real world practice and patients' profiles. Okay. So, but the data that is generated must be of certain quality. They must be, relevant, and they must be reliable. So relevant, again, including inclusion of important variables and the information related to the outcome. So you must be relevant, and also, the patients must be representative of the target population, and it must be of sufficient sample size. Again, for reliability, they must be accurate, complete, transparent, and with proper quality assurance measures. Okay. So who is concerned? To whom it's important? It's accordingly, it's very, very important for the regulators, for the payers, for the industry, and for providers and for patients. At least, indications, new indications can be actually thought of, out of this new population and many others. And for patients, next slide, please. Omar, next slide, please. So for the patients, it's actually very important. Why? Because it can accelerate the time to market by the value-based risk sharing. Maybe you can hear about that. And also a comparison of alternative interventions so that, it can, help decision taking and estimation of effectiveness rather than efficacy. Information, as I just mentioned, on rare diseases and many others, and availability of long-term effectiveness and safety data, which is not available normally with the the randomized clinical trials. So what are the challenges of using the real-world data? Although it's very important, however, we still have a problem. First, it's digitalization. We need to go digital. But also the data infrastructure needs to be more concerned. We must be more concerned with the infrastructure. And the data standards must be unified. The standards must be so that you can actually get meaningful information. The data quality need to be improved, the quality. Okay, and also the curation of the data, standardization, enrichment, and all these things must be in place. Okay, Omar. Okay, so what are the next steps for real-world data and evidence? Okay, what I expect, what we hope, not actually what we hope, what will definitely happen, because it's very important. So everybody must from now take this seriously. And I can see the regulatory is taking it seriously, and also the companies are taking it seriously. They are bringing high-profile, candidates to work for, be responsible for this very important subject. And we have also experts in many parts of our region, including, of course, Dr. Jihan and many others. So first, there will be harmonization very soon, and the real-world data, the endpoints will be validated and developed and validated, and there will be standardization of data collections, curations, transparency of the data, and collaboration between different stakeholders is very, very, very important. Okay. So thank you very much. I hope it's not too long. So thank you. I'll leave the floor to Dr. Jihan now.
Thank you, Dr. Musad, for giving us this brief about the picture of the impact of real-world evidence from the medical perspective. And now I will leave the floor to Dr. Jihan to introduce herself and to give us the picture from the health economic perspectives. So the floor is yours, Dr. Jihan. Doctor, you are muted.
Yeah, you are muted.
Dr. Omar, thank you, Dr. Omar, for your presentation. And thank you, Dr. Musad, for the wonderful presentation and the clear messages that you want to say to everyone. Could you please, Dr. Omar, let me share my presentation from my side, please?
Okay. Sure.
Yes,
sure.
Please.
Go ahead, Doctor.
Thanks to everyone. Thanks for everyone attending today. I really feel pleasure and feel honored to have you today and to discuss and to share knowledge with everyone today in the webinar. My name is Jihan Hamdi Sisi. I'm Managing Director, HT Office. This is a healthcare solutions company specialized in health economics and outcomes research. I will try to make it in Arabic and English. I will try to talk in both languages because I know all the audience are from Middle East. So I want to make it more simplified and more identified clear messages. We'll talk today about the impact of real-world evidence on market access. خليني أبدأ كده بمسج مهم قوي، يعني حابة إن أنا يعني أبدأ بيها البرزنتيشن بتاعتي. يعني هو mainly زي ما ال FDA قالت أو زي ما بنقول كده، يعني accordingly Director ال FDA Center for Drug Evaluation and Research قال إيه؟ قال إن clinical trial system is broken and there needs to be new ways to collect and utilize patient data. فيعني we cannot say and we cannot replace the clinical trials by the real world evidence. يعني احنا مش بنقول ان ال real world evidence replace ال clinical trials، لكن خلينا نقول ان هم they are complementary to each other. we need both. We need clinical trials and we need real world evidence. لكن فكرة ان انا افوكس بس على الكلينيكال trials is not the right way. يعني is not the right way to يعني demonstrate the value of innovative treatments mainly expensive drugs اللي احنا mainly بنشوفها عندنا في الميدل ايست وورلد وايد يعني. فدي يعني كنت حابه بس ان انا ابدا بالكود دي لان دي هتبقى مهمه قوي في اللي احنا mainly هنتكلم عليه النهارده يعني. we need to close the evidence gap. محتاجين ان still we cannot rely on clinical trials only because clinical trials is focusing on safety and efficacy only, not focusing on cost effectiveness, not focusing on effectiveness and the real ground and the real data اللي already احنا بنكون محتاجينها علشان اقدر ان انا evaluate او اقدر اعمل measurement بالشكل المظبوط للدراج ده او للتريتمنت ده، بالذات واحنا بنتكلم على innovative treatments او ادويه جديده expensive يعني need to be measured in a very accurate way and in a very زي ما بنقول كده from a local context perspective. يعني what does it mean by local context perspective? Because يعني the local data or the clinical data may differ from country to country. It's very important إن أنا close the evidence gap. ولو دايما بالذات في الميدل ايست countries بيبقى عندنا lack of data. This lack of data يعني could not be solved without real world evidence data. يعني it's very important to invest in real world evidence علشان اقدر ان انا demonstrate الفاليو الحقيقيه للinnovative treatments according للكونتري اللي انا فيها او according mainly للبلد اللي انا فيها يعني. ف يعني
دكتوره جان sorry for interrupting you. Many of the attendees are are not Arabic speaking, so kindly make it in English language, please. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. But
I got this message in the chatting part. That's why.
Okay, no problem. I just reviewed the attendees list, found all of them from Arabic background. Maybe I know most of them. But no problem, we can make it in English. Okay, so it's very important. It's very important to close the gap between the efficacy and effectiveness. So in order to measure the cost effectiveness of a certain product, we have to search for effectiveness. We have to focus on effectiveness, which is based on the real ground data or the real world data. This is very important, and this is يعني the core of measuring the real value of many products. So always there is a challenge in collecting data. Always there is a lack of data in many countries, and we cannot address this lack of data by clinical trials because clinical trials are very expensive and not only about cost but also about duration of these clinical trials. These trials takes a lot of time. Take much time to collect data, and at many times and many cases, these data we found that there is many challenges in collecting this data, and it takes then about years and more than 5 or 6 years to report the results of these data. So we have to close the evidence or to close the evidence gap between clinical trials and the effectiveness studies and the cost effectiveness studies. So what does it mean by real world data? I will not repeat what said by Dr. Mossad, but let's keep it mainly from a health economics perspective or from market access perspective. So real world data is data regarding effects of health interventions on the real ground, which is include benefit, risk, resource use, frequency of lab tests, frequency of diagnostic tests, which actually doesn't or didn't collected in many of clinical trials or in highly controlled randomized control trials. Because as you know, randomized control trials are, it's about inclusion and exclusion criteria. So we have certain subjects, certain inclusion criteria and certain exclusion criteria. So we cannot, not all the population are represented in these trials. So we need to collect data. We need to invest in primary research data. And if we didn't find these data, or if we didn't know how to collect these data regarding the resource use or regarding the cost data, we can go to the secondary research data, which is less evident. What does it mean by less evident? Less evident means that these data, I cannot direct the data collection in the secondary research data. So these data are weak, not strong enough to rely on or to inform the payers by it. So it's very important to collect this data by another means like real-world data or like the effectiveness studies. So it's very important also to focus on the data regarding outcomes and regarding the health-related quality of life. For example, we always conduct the health economic studies and capture the utility data and the quality of life data from other published studies, other published international studies, which is at many times and at many cases are not from countries like our countries, like the countries we actually want to inform our payers on it. So real-world data means that any information collected outside a clinical trial, it may be like a safety data, it may be like a resource use data, it may be like data related to outcomes or related to the effectiveness of these studies. So it's very important to try to collect these data on the real ground and from the country that we want to inform these payers on it. So the concept of transforming real-world data, such as the claims data or the electronic medical records into evidence, can really improve the health outcomes, can really improve the reporting of the real value of the innovative products to payers and decision makers and decision influencers. Because many payers and many decision makers has no time to review the clinical trials and has no time to try to compare what happening in the clinical trial and what happening in our world or in our real world. So data like notes, patient forums, social media, payers meeting, it's very important also to collect insights from clinical experts and physicians, because these data are matched the local practice data that we want to focus on and we want to inform the payers on it. At many times we will find that especially when we doing or when we conducting the health economic studies, when we validating the structure of the model or the clinical data collected already from the clinical trials, when these data validated from the clinical experts in many payers meetings already conducted before, we found that many clinicians said that no, we actually don't capture these side effects. These side effects are not happening in our country. So these side effects are rarely occurred. So we cannot collect it in our studies or in our health economic studies. So this data is very important. We cannot rely only on clinical trials. We should rely on effectiveness data and real-world data in order to better inform the value of this product to the decision makers and decision influencers. Data like notes, like patient forum, like social media, like payers meetings are very important and can have better insights on a patient data on individual level, not on a population level and this is we need the actually we need to capture both patient on a level, on individual level data, and also data on a population level, because we need to form how this can behave in our country, how this product can treat our patients. So this is the main message that we want to focus on. So why do we need real-world data? We want this data because there is many target populations or many targeted patients are not represented in these clinical trials. And also we found that many social media platforms are actually collecting data about their experience, about their treatments, their experience about their diseases, the burden they feel, the burden they have. So it's very important to consider this data from social media. So depending on another types of data or another data sources is very important and can help us in collecting real-world data in a specific local country. As you see in the figure, you will see that actually we cannot test the efficacy and safety of a specific product without a clinical trial. We should have a clinical trial at the beginning in order to test the efficacy and the safety of this product. But what after this product already regulated, and after what about if this product is marketed into in a specific country, and after that we will find that there is adverse events, there is some as we see some reports, some could be possible that we can find some mortality data about some products, like many products already withdrawn from different countries. So it's very important to give the medical providers and the insurer a better figure, a better insights about how this product behaves in the market, how this product ascertain the effectiveness already feel it or already reported by the patient. This effectiveness data could not only reported by the patient, but also could be reported by the caregiver, by the physician, by the nurse, by the healthcare team. So we cannot rely on patients only. We can rely on other source of data, on other rapporteur of data that can give better insights, especially if these patients cannot express themselves. So there is, for many cases, for many concepts, for any new concept, we found problems and improvements for real-world data. We found confounders and bias in effectiveness studies, because these trials or these studies are not double-blinded, are not, they are open treatment. The patient know what treatment he have. But at the same time, this real-world data can improve the decision-making, can identify specific cases, can capture the health-related quality of life data, can capture other socio-demographic data and disease severity and other comorbidities cannot be captured in clinical trial or cannot be captured in other randomized studies or even observational studies. So it's very important to invest in real-world data. It's very important to limit the missing data that we actually face it in clinical trials. So real-world evidence is very important. Real-world evidence is translating data into decisions that we can have, that we can rely on, that we can adopt these treatments to the patients and feeling satisfied that these treatments can have a better outcomes for the patients. This is the main message that we want to focus on. So real-world evidence could include data from retrospective or prospective observational studies. The most important thing in real-world data or in the real-world evidence is to have data from a specific country, especially if we want to inform the payers of this country. if we want to provide insights beyond the data already addressed in clinical trials. So what are our goals, or what are the goals of the real-world evidence? The main goal is to maximize the opportunity to incorporate data and evidence from settings that actually reflect the clinical practice, that actually reflect the local clinical practice, that differ from country to country, that differ from stage of disease to another stage of disease. So it improves efficiency, it improves population identification and selection of a specific patients. This real-world data can highlight or can give insights about the patients that can most benefit from those treatments. We cannot give the innovative treatments to anyone. We cannot give the innovative treatments to all the population. We can only give the innovative treatments to patients that will get benefit from those treatments. And this is the most important core, or the most important information that we want to highlight, or that we want to get it from the real-world evidence. So real-world evidence could inform us about the different patients, the different efficacy, the different level of efficacy that differ from patient to patient according to the personal experience. It can follow up, or it can go over the patient lifetime, and can give us better figures and better insights about how the patient or how this product behave in the market, how this product behave with the patient. Does the patient have the better outcomes with this drug or not? So this real-world data could inform a lot about effectiveness, about
Dr.
the
Rajan,
quality.
Dr. Rajan, sorry for interrupting you. You have just 1 minute in order,
Okay.
because we are having another talk.
Okay, I will try to summarize. So real-world evidence could inform us about how to improve the quality of the risk-sharing agreements. And the risk-sharing agreements is very important. Many regulatory bodies depend on the risk-sharing agreements in order to fund or adopt many innovative treatments. For example, NICE used the real-world evidence in 86% of the NICE submissions, which is very important information that we want to simulate, or we want to do like what NICE done. So real-world evidence is relevant for HTA. Real-world evidence is needed for HTA. Examples for real-world evidence: we can do patient registry, we can do health surveys, we can do pragmatic studies. I will not go through Egyptian case studies, but I feel that there is no time to talk more about that. But I can conclude what I said in my presentation. I just want to conclude with one quote by Dr. Jolly Locklear, the head for health economics and outcomes research for EMD Serono. This quote means a lot. This quote actually summarizes what we want to deliver, or what we want to highlight, or what we want to say about real-world evidence. If we can do this, and do this successfully, we might one day be able to increase the access to the right drugs for the right patients at the right time. And then we will have better value for the money spent. And most importantly, we will be working to try and improve the health and lives of millions of patients by real-world evidence. This could be done by real-world evidence. Thank you for paying attention, and hope that I delivered my messages.
Thank you, Dr. Rajan. It was very informative lecture. Kindly stop sharing from your side, Doctor.
Okay.
Please. Yes, in order to share the Dr. Fawaz. Now I will leave the floor to Dr. Fawaz to share with us his experience about the value evidence and market access that is important.
Can I share the slide?
Okay, Doctor. Okay, I will stop sharing from my side. Okay. Go ahead, Doctor.
Okay. My voice is clear now?
Yes, yes, Doctor.
In the beginning, I would like to thank all my colleagues. They are giving me this opportunity to share or to exchange the experience over the region. And I think a lot of topics or points already covered by the presenters. But I will start just by disclosure. This activity is away from Amgen activity. Then I will go to take this presentation from the scope of market access. And I think I want to go through the short story or short brief about the evolvement of market access and how is the real world evidence is being part of this. I think the market access started before two decades by hiring key account manager. He was just reported for the commercial, and his role was just pure commercial role, depend on what it called in the past the ambassador of the company or the one-face customer. He was responsible about to represent the whole portfolio of the company with situational cross-functional interaction. Then it's evolved to have narrow market access, and they start simulating some external health economic outcome research applications or experience from other regions and use it to persuade or to convince the payer and the decision makers with limited cross-functional interactions. Then it's also evolved to be to have a broader scope of market access into health policy and also in evidence planning and also in the regulatory during the submissions. At this level, the market access start to have deep interaction with all cross functions. And let's go to the current situation here is that the market access has a broader scope of market access into health policy and health policy shaping and real world data collection, value-based healthcare purposes, and also preparing for pricing and reimbursement readiness, regulatory submissions, doses, and etc. At this level, or the current situations, market access have being intentionally one of the daily activity of all cross functions, and this is the current situation of market access. And my expectation for the future of the market access, I think I think some of the companies they start using this model. The market access will have broader scope of to adopt internally to adopt or adapt for health economic outcome research applications and vanishing the rebates. As you know that the high cost medications, you cannot spend billions of US dollars and then give discounts or direct rebates. And I think the market access start to vanishing the rebates to other applications, predict the real value and major role of real world evidence in decision-making process. I think the role of market access in the future should be redefined the accountability and responsibility based on this broader interaction with cross functions. Next, I will talk about the resources of real world evidence. And I think this slide is already treated by Dr. Jihan and Dr. Musab before. And just I want to know to highlight on a very important point from my experience. Data is there. Data is in Egypt, in Saudi, in the Gulf, in the south and the north, in the east and the west. Data is there. The problem is the digitalization, as Dr. Musab said. We want national database, and we are in the time of revolution of communication. What we want just to make a hub or communication between all this data with each other to make us extract the data at any time, and facilitate the decision-making process. I want to talk a lot about all these details about the resources of the real-world evidence, but it looks that the importance of using the managed entry agreement or outcome-based agreement nowadays for high-cost medication, and also the social media, as Dr. Jihan has mentioned, and we can look for the users of high-cost medications in Facebook, Twitter, or sometimes we can we can also realize the impact of the communication, the social media, and the COVID time. This is one of the major examples. How is the social media have impact on facilitating and fastening the decision-making process? Next slide, just I want to talk about the most challenges facing market access in this field. We have in the future, or in this future, currently we have more fragmented payers, and I think our region, except I think Tunisia or Turkey, we are just fragmented payers. And I think the evaluation process, for example, in Saudi market, we have now clusters. We have about Sahha will be around 22 clusters for under the MOH. And all of this, they have their own evaluation process, and this is will lack or make the decision process is slower. And I think our leader in the country and or in the Gulf or in the region, they are trying to improve this one by accelerating the health technology assessment maturity. The second point is the insurance coverage of of high cost medication. And as you know that I think during the next years, the insurance company will dominate or they cover all the population or region, and it will be one of the major sources for real world evidence if they are start to have issue with high cost medication. And I understand why they are doing this, because in the end of the day, they are business owners and they want to keep the policy or the insurance policy renewed year and after year. If they are going to adopt or approve high cost medications, that will lead in the end of the day that this company or X company will not renew the policy or the contract in the next year. The third point is, and by the way, this is one of the source of real world evidence. If we didn't have real world evidence for this high cost medications, we will have a huge gap. The third point is increased value-based models. This is one of the challenge because this models taking time to give us outcome to use it as a data and translate it to evidence. And also it is have a financial consequences. And this is one of the challenges we face in market access. Also the public pressure and pricing. We have for sure the public, they are making pressure to get an affordable pricing. And also the fifth point is greater pricing transparency. Now, I think the decision makers in Egypt or in GCC on the region, it's not like that before. They are just by one click, they can go for the prices of the medication over the globe. And from my perspective, this is not fair because you cannot make the same price in Indonesia. It's the same price in Japan, or it's not fair to get the same price for in Saudi by the same price in, for example, in Egypt. It depends about the low or middle or high income of countries, the population, the disease prevalence, the many factors they can affect on the pricing, and also the reimbursement time. Some countries like Turkey, just by one click or final decision, you can be reimbursed for the whole of the population. But like, for example, in Saudi market, we have a long journey of getting the approvals and to be reimbursement for the patient population. The final or the last point is the rebates. And this is will be this upward to value-based pricing. This is challenge because the other side or the payers, they are always pressuring to get the easy way, the easy business, discount or rebates. But from our side as a pharma industry, we are looking for the value-based pricing to predict or to explain why the price is high. And also, you know that the pharma industry is spending $1 billion in the R&D, and they are putting some profit margin to keep the investment in the future. And if the payers in the region, Egypt or in GCC or in the globe, they are making pressure on the pharma industry to decrease the cost of the medications, that will lead to stop the investment in innovative medications and then stop the involvement or the development of cancer therapy or chronic disease. And this is really one of the negative of pressure price from the governmental side or public side in the globe. Next slide. I will take you through the guideline of the real world data, how it will be beneficial. How can we receive a good evidence data? I think it should have standard evidence generation. For example, it's not fair, for example, to collect data about 100 patients from, for example, from Turkey or and 100 patients from Egypt and 100 from Saudi, and came on the table for the payer or for the prescriber and say, hey, this is we gathered real world data or real world evidence about certain disease or therapeutic area. It should be collected from scattered area. It should be linked with each other to be figured and important and has a real impact on the decision-making process. The other point is the high-cost medication. It's better to validate real-world evidence from many resources. For example, the managed entry agreement, or as Dr. Jihan mentioned, Dr. Musad, the risk-sharing agreement, or what it's called outcome-based agreement, because this is make to translate the value of the price. Also, the higher value of the real-world evidence at the time of the launch is crucial to validate product performance. Otherwise, you are going to target certain or specific country, and then you didn't have a higher value of real-world evidence, and you didn't have enough data about the market you are going to target. This will be useless. You have to validate a higher value of real-world evidence before coming to targeted country or going to launch your medication in this country. Also, pricing based on clinical programs no longer guarantee desired price. Yes, you cannot depend only on the randomized clinical trials or clinical programs to say that I will take a premium price only. This is not the situation. We have to consider also the drug potential value and data collected in real world practice. This can secure excellent value based pricing. Real world evidence also should be gathered with forethought to answer and support decision maker and change positively the current pathway of the care. Yes, this is one of the important points. You cannot come to the market and gathering the data which is irrelevant for the country. You should gather data from the real world setting, and should this data improve the disease management and also public health outcomes. Otherwise, it's useless. It's useless, and the payer and the policy makers and the budget holders, when they found your intervention is not give that value by the standard of care, they will not accept you, or maybe they will remove you from the not give you the market authorization. Also, the other point is predicting value for the new innovation, especially high-cost medication in real clinical practice, and extrapolating early clinical data into meaningful real-world information. Also, the drug maker must have a real-world evidence protocol planned at the launch and the strong intelligence of what data is available or what data not available for each patient group, and this is also I think it's mentioned by Dr. Jihan and Dr. Musad about the subgroupations and indications. You have to collect data about the specific country you are going to target it. Otherwise, if you didn't have idea what's the data is available and what the data is available and what data is not available, that's mean you are in the wrong pathway. Also, the high knowledge of healthcare provider and payer gaps facilitates the sort of real-world evidence should be gathered proactively before launch medication or adding, for example, indication or dosage form or concentration, etc. Also, I will go for this slide. This slide is also talk about the real-world evidence challenges, gaps, opportunity, market access. I think I'm talking about today, this slide or my presentation is from market access perspective. So I think from my perspective, one of the gaps, which is the integrated electronic medical records. And in our country, we are going to implement such project in our Vision 2030 in Saudi Arabia. And this will help to link the data between the health, between the accounts or the other countries. As mentioned in the first slide, data is there, but we need to link this data with each other. We need also one of the gaps. We have scattered accounts with fragmented payers, evaluation process in each institution or in MOH. And I think this is the situation in most of region. We need to implement or to develop health technology assessment, and we are in Saudi market now in the piloting phase for health technology assessment, and I'm sure that our leaders in MOH and in government, they are preparing to reach to the maturity during 2022 or 2023. Also, we have lack in clinical research organization that can adopt all this real-world evidence or digitalization or gathering the data by the acceptable cost. One of the problems that the high cost of services produced by clinical research organization. One of the challenges also, value should be validated proactively to avoid product failure. Sometimes you have to bring validated data or real-world data before coming to the targeted market. Otherwise, you will find yourself after 1 or 2 years, it's removed from the market. And this is one of the challenges, that the quality of data should be collected proactively. Also, the real-world data based on health economic research should be collected and prepared retrospectively. This is to explain for the payer and the physicians what's the benefit or what's the value from this new intervention or innovation. Is it, for example, reduce the events, surgery, hospitalization? Is it impact positive on society burden or productivity? Otherwise, it will lead to price pressure and more formulary restriction at the launch time. Also, in case of lack of real-world data, I think engagement with the authorities or with the authorities or with the institutions or accounts or the targeted country, we have to engage with observational study for real clinical practice, from the real clinical practice, by using the agencies or clinical research organization to link this data over time. And this is data or the updates, it will change the reimbursement decision over the time, and this will be helpful from market access perspective. Opportunity, we have opportunity. The opportunity is to engage. I think they are starting to accept, the payer and the decision maker to accept, or the authority they accept to, or the budget holder they accept to make early engagement with the authorities and budget holders to predict the value, and also to ask if they have the willingness to work or to remove the uncertainty, and this will, in the end of the day, help to improve the decision-making process. On the other side, early engagement with the authorities also help the drug makers, the company itself, to allow them to put a commercial strategy and medical strategy, help the patients and market real demands. The last slide, real world, for sure that the revolution in communication happened in COVID time. This has given us lessons, learning lessons, that real world evidence management experience locally or globally should be in data, should be put in data platform to improve access to this clinical management and make physicians and prescribers familiar with everyday practice. And I think this is not the case to certain country. I think we need to make a national database, a data platform in each country, and link all of them in one hub. This will make the decision-making process and make also the physicians and prescribers familiar with the everyday practice. Also, patient engagement in COVID time, we can get the maximum, the perfect lesson from the patient engagement in COVID time. Now, you know that the R&D time is taking very long time, but in COVID time or COVID vaccines, the time is reduced to 1 year. And from the collected data from the real world evidence from scattered countries in the globe, we found ourselves during 1 year extend the indication to 12 years and above. And I think now, I think 1 month or 2 months, they will start using the vaccines from 5 years and above. This has come from the real world evidence, and this is the real value of the real world evidence. Also defined collecting data retrospectively to consider gaps. Sometimes when you are going to communicate data with certain country, it needs value states, its communication, it needs sometimes the sessions and presentations, and I think we can collect this data retrospectively and consider it in platforms to cover the gaps, and manage it in the future. Also, prospectively to give optimistic commitment based on the managed entry agreement or outcome-based agreement to facilitate the pricing and reimbursements. Finally, data from digital platform over time will help to paint the marketplace need and close the gap between the clinical effectiveness and cost effectiveness. And this is the continuous concern and battle between the effectiveness, the efficacy and effectiveness, and also by the clinical effectiveness and the cost effectiveness. I think what we need in the end is more sober, I will not say sober, but we need a strong infrastructure to build all the real world evidence available in all countries by each other. This will facilitate and shortening the decision-making process in Gulf region or even in the globe. And I think that I add value for this presentation, and I know that my colleagues covered a lot or almost of points. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Fawaz, for this really informative presentation and lecture. So I will leave the floor to Mr. Douglas to give us a short brief about the technology, the real world, the use of the technology and the artificial intelligence in the real world evidence. So the floor is yours, Mr. Douglas, but please try to make it a little bit shorter in order to give a floor for some question and answers. The floor is yours. Thank you.
You're muted, Mr. Drake, you're muted.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you noting that. Really appreciate, and also I appreciate the invitation from ACRO to participate in this discussion. It's actually been very, very insightful, and I really appreciate also the other speakers. I want to talk a little bit differently about real-world data as a source for real-world evidence, and then talk about Clinarion based in Basel, Switzerland, and about an EMR network that we're expanding into the Middle East, and how that can be a source for real-world data that can be obviously used for real-world evidence. And this goes to a lot of the same points that many of my colleagues have talked about, but I want to just share with you some of our experiences and what we're trying to build. Clinarion is based in Basel, Switzerland. I'm an American living here in Basel. We've been working with a nominalized EHR, or a hospital information system, for almost 9 years. We have built a hub and spoke, basically, network with hospitals throughout the world, where we can leverage real-time, real patient and real-world data for clinical research and evidence. And so this has been something that we've been working on, really how to develop this data capability, and I'll show you how that works. And I'm going to go a little quickly, but I also am available for questions. I want to talk about real-world data because real-world data is really important to becoming real-world evidence. And the definition of real-world data is anything clinically relevant from a patient that can be used as a data source. So, for example, digital EMR or their electronic medical records, even biomarkers or laboratory results. We've also talked about claims data. Increasingly, there's more data from IoT and other types of information. Within the hospital, there's a massive amount of digital information from charts to medical imaging to laboratory results, histology, pathology, even genetics that is now available. I want to say that now what's being important to this, and I think this was mentioned in the previous talk, is this idea of how this real-world data can be used relevant to make real-world evidence, which is the supporting evidence of how medications can be used effectively and therapeutically. And this was actually really how real-world data to real-world evidence was initially seen, was really from the standpoint of health economics outcomes research. But increasingly, now I'm seeing real-world data being asked for in all aspects of clinical research and even early drug discovery. This is a publication that I referenced from Novartis, 2020, where they talk about how real-world data is really being used now from the standpoint of research, other therapeutic research, looking at trial optimization, looking at patient insight, patient journey, looking at obviously competitive insights, commercial insights, but really understanding the whole patient journey from diagnosis to treatment, and then obviously endpoints to really look at treatment methodologies, efficacy, and then obviously reimbursement for care. So real-world data kind of falls into four groups, which I want to briefly hit upon. One is demonstrating product efficacy and value, and this is immediately important for showing obviously label claims and being able to commercialize a product. But it's also becoming very important to understand the patient's journey with the medication and understanding the doctor's decisions in prescribing that and being able to better understand the doctor's care and their treatment decisions and really then obviously the ultimate impact on the patient journey so that we can better understand patient progression and outcomes. And this patient journey aspect I want to highlight because this is what we can really pick up within EHR data. EHR data is digital electronic data within the hospital. In many systems where there's a digital EMR system, we can pick up the patient demographics, the medications, laboratory results, diagnosis, and procedures, and follow these over time. And this becomes important because that time element is really the journey of the patient and really helping very much so show how their care or treatment leads to outcomes. This is part of our platform and really a focus on the patients first, but really also data security and protection and being able to do this globally. And this is what we've been doing now across almost 20 countries and about 36 million patients. So we've now built this as a hospital node hub server where we can connect. This is the hospital IT system, as you see here. Bottom right is the hospital information system. We can anonymize that and still keeping the data here within this blue box within the hospital firewall, be able to query and bring out aggregate results. So I can very quickly understand where, for example, breast cancer patients are, how they've been treated, the tests, laboratory results, the demographics, and so forth, and very, very quickly be able to work with sponsors and the hospitals to improve their care, obviously do any type of outreach, as well as also clinical trial research. One of the things that's important in this aspect is that we're providing also the hospital an interface called a patient finder where they can actually use this data for their own patient care and stratification, which is many times EMR data is not even visible to the doctors. So they're not even aware that this type of information is being coded. Now they can actually see their patients and be able to follow them much more through the digital record within the hospital. So we do this across, as I said, a variety of different geographies, and I'll show you a picture of that, across a variety of different diagnostic codings, different types of data structure. And what we do is bring this up into an aggregate data structure that we can query and do this live through a cloud-based infrastructure that we have here in Europe. And so we're entirely European system, basically GDPR protected. and also really about also patient privacy. So I can discuss this with you. But one of our keys is the data never leaves the hospital. We're bringing out metrics around, for example, the patients there, but not actually bringing out the patient's data in any way. So this is an example of doing this. This is, for example, querying diabetes. This is a type 2 looking at kidney function. We want to see complications of renal function. So we're also looking at various medications, various types of insulin, and we're looking at age between 20 and 70. And from this, then I can start looking at essentially building a cohort. Who are the patients that fit within this, and being able to tell you what patients within my geographies or hospitals match this cohort specificity. And that way, by doing inclusion and exclusion, we can rapidly get down to where those patients are. So this allows us to now do this across a variety of different geographies. I'm going to focus, we're obviously based in Switzerland. We have a number of different hospitals here. This system is actually used also nationally within Switzerland to federate all the teaching hospitals through the Swiss private hospital network system, actually a personal healthcare system. Then we obviously have large populations in Turkey, also into the UAE, and then further we're expanding into KSA. But we also have large populations in South America, Brazil, as you see, also Colombia. We're expanding in Uruguay. We also have opportunity to expand in the United States as well as the UK. And then big populations also in Eastern Europe, including Poland, Hungary, and Croatia. So we're very actively growing, and I'll show a map of our growth here in the next couple of slides. But let me give you a couple of examples of applying this. This is an example from Turkey looking at multiple myeloma, first instance 2018. The country indices for this disease occurrence by the WHO for 2018 was 2,331 patients. We could find almost 70% of those patients within our hospitals in less than 20% of the total population. So by looking at the hospital data, we can really look for patients that are seeking treatment or under care. So we very much so enrich from a small pool, finding most of the disease patients. This also applies to rare disease, and I'll show you that. In Brazil, same example, we can find from this, we can find 843, which is 15% of the patients and less than 3% of the total population. So this is an example of doing this in Turkey, looking at multiple myeloma once again. And this is what's looking at just this particular cohort. So we can look at patients that are diagnosed by their age. We can identify potential comorbidities by looking at, for example, hypertension, kidney disease, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, age, and other potential cancers to develop a Charlson comorbidity score to give you an indication of how severe or how well they can handle treatment. We can also look at the most commonly treated administrative therapeutics. Bortezomib, as you see, the most common treatment here. Sodium chloride is used in any type of IV drip, so that's one of the highest ingredients. But you see here that we can then map the bortezomib regime and see how this in combination is being used in this treatment cohort. So this is just a quick example how we can do this by really getting down into the digital data to see how these cohorts are, and obviously what the treating practice is within the country. This is an example from UAE, from Cleveland Clinic. This is severe asthma, where we're looking at nitric oxide as a biomarker, and then looking at these patients that obviously are having severe asthma attacks as a type 2 inflammation. We can then see what type of lab tests they're getting, the type of comorbidities they have, other risk factors that they might have, and then additionally the therapeutics that they're seeing. So we can see how this cohort is essentially being treated very readily within Cleveland Clinic. And that way we can see how various treatments obviously are mitigating those, for example, type 2 asthma responses and whether they're getting better or worse. A third example, which I really like to highlight, is COVID. And during, as you know, with the pandemic, there really wasn't an existing clinical trial or the clinical research ongoing. So EMR data became really the only way to see many times COVID patients live, see how they were being treated, diagnosed, and obviously outcomes. And you can see obviously that we can very quickly see within our geographies where these patients are being admitted, treated. We can start looking at age. We can start looking at various treatment methodologies and seeing how those patients were progressing. And this became in many ways the only way to really start looking at modeling these patients that then got used to developing clinical trials. I also want to talk about how this type of thing can be used for our EMR network, can be used to also find rare disease patients. And we have two projects that I'll talk about, both for Sanofi in Turkey and the UAE, looking at various forms of lysosomal storage disorder by looking at phenotypes. And this is something that many times doctors, what they tend to do is look at one phenotype, looking at, for example, in the case of Fabry, looking at, for example, maybe cardiovascular, and then looking at maybe, for example, renal function. But in the case of Fabry, you have many times multiple conditions. They have a cardiovascular issue, they may have a renal condition, they may have peripheral pain, they have other things. And what we can start doing is looking at those various possible combinations of those phenotypes to potentially say whether this patient is a rare disease patient that's never been fully diagnosed. And so this is now going forward in both Turkey and the UAE into direct outreach through ethical committee approval to reach back to these patients that can be identified in the hospital, have them diagnostically tested, and then put finally on the correct medication. And this obviously then impacts the patient's life, also their family, and also their community. And this can be further enabled. We're doing much more in this phenotypic modeling using AI and other things like this. So this is actually a poster that we presented on this work, just showing you some of the results in chart 3, showing how we can enrich for both Fabry, Gaucher, MPS I, and Pompe, and looking at how to triangulate these patients based upon their phenotypic response, not direct diagnosis, and then build enrichment models toward this. We're doing much more machine learning, and so the idea of, once again, this hospital network is that we can use this as a federated learning. And one of the aspects of that is we're also building is natural language processing, or MLP. This MLP is going to be important also for bringing in unstructured data, but especially in very many parts of the world, that MLP is important to also help structure information that is not structured. So even if they don't have an EMR or electronic medical care system, we can work with them to obviously digitize their data and make that available so that we can obviously use it in a digital format. So this is a little bit on what we're growing toward. We're 36 million patients currently. We're expanding, once again, also into Saudi Arabia, United Emirates, further, Turkey, you see, as one of our biggest populations, Georgia in Asia, India, Armenia, further into Europe. You see, obviously, Eastern Europe and Switzerland, where I'm based, and then South America, Brazil, Colombia, Uruguay. So we're very excited to work with Ray CRO and very excited to be part of this presentation. And I really appreciate your patience and look forward to any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Douglas, for giving us a very good information about the technology, the use of the technology in the real world evidence and the data generation. The question is now for you, Mr. William, Mr. Douglas, about do you think that with the presence of record in the Middle East, talking about the Middle East area, do you think that your technology can apply for being used in the Middle East
Yes.
area, and at the same time, how we can overcome the presence of paper hospital records?
So yes, it can be. And actually, I want to give you two examples. We're working in, for example, KSA, with the National Guard hospitals. They actually are digitized, and so we're actually implementing those hospitals currently. We've also been in discussion with, for example, Novartis in Egypt about possibly applying our system with a government. Egypt actually has a really substantial patient registry, which they've digitized. And our system could be used to obviously help apply that and make it searchable. So there is a lot of digital content within the regions. It may not necessarily be digital content within the hospital, but there's also now increasingly a lot of digital content and registry systems on the government level that we can access and help facilitate and make it searchable.
Okay, thank you. What about the paper records in the hospital? Do you have any solution for to overcome such conditions? Yes.
Yes. So one of the things that we're working on is, as I mentioned, the strategy with NLP, natural language processing. So a lot of these paper documents, especially if they're PDF, we can actually create search algorithms to basically look at the occurrence of disease and related to obviously logic, so that digitally we're actually understanding it much like human reading it would. And that way being able to glean, for example, the content or the interpretation of the doctor on his specific notes. This is many times how we can get much more subjective interpretation on the patient's progression is from the physician's records, which are not oftentimes directly digitized, but by basically able to scanning those, and there's a variety of different technologies currently for this. We're actually doing this now in multi-languages. Most of the natural language processing that's being done is currently in English, and we're really working to expand this into all our other languages so that the same intelligence can be applied across documents in Saudi Arabia, Turkey, elsewhere in the region quite readily. I mean, we have the same problem also in South America with documents and physician notes also in Spanish.
That's great. Thank you. The question now for the Dr. Fawaz. As you know that all the regulatory authorities in Europe and FDA and the states and the different regulatory authorities are accepting the real-world evidence as a source for registering the new medications or even new indications for the drugs which is already marketed. Do you think that this will be applied in our region, in the Middle East and Africa region, especially the Gulf region?
I think from my perspective, already there, especially in Saudi market, we have a system called SAB. This is PAS, Patient Access Patient Access Program, and this is linked with the randomized clinical trials, and sometimes they are collecting data from certain hospitals or institutions. I think this is from SFDA 1, you can consider it accepting for the conditional real-world evidence, and also there is some tries in the past in the account. I think in north part of Saudi Arabia, they are trying to conversion the electronic medical record to the observational health data science and informatics, and also to observational medical outcome partnership common data. And I think this was related to respiratory patient or respiratory disease. This is just trying to converge the electronic medical record, and this is trying to make a national database. Once they start, I think we have in Saudi the old super infrastructure to do this, and I think the globe is coming to accept the real world evidence, especially that we cannot stop the communication between each other. This will be mandatory. We will find ourselves in one hub, and we can click or extract the data from anywhere. And also we have experience, I think Dr. Jihan has mentioned, and Dr. Mus'ad, he's mentioned for the risk sharing agreement. Now they are starting to accept this at the level of reimbursement, not about the authority they are getting giving the approval, SFDA, or from the reimbursement level. I mean, the MOH and the institutions, they are start accepting the risk sharing agreement or outcome based to protect or to facilitate the decision making process, or to predict or to explain the value of the price. I think all these elements, if you collected in one sentence and put it on the table for any decision makers and anyone in the globe, they will accept, especially that, as I told or mentioned before, the problem in the past was how to collect or to communicate all this data easily. But now we have super infrastructure in Europe, Canada, America, or in Asia. We have a strong infrastructure to make this, And I'm sure during 5 years, that will be very easy to collect real world evidence about everything by one click.
Thank you, Dr. Fawaz.
Yes, I think this will be acceptable because it will be from costs, it will be less than the sending group of experts to Europe or America. This is, I think, it will be gathered to the local market. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. The question now for Dr. Jihan. Do you think that the real-world evidence data available for the drugs and in the different hospitals could be considered as a credible source for confirming the cost effectiveness of the drug, which is already marketed in the market, or even in a new drug?
Yes, I think it's available.
So yeah, it will be considered as a credible source to confirm the cost effectiveness of the drugs. Yes, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So do you have a previous experience with that, Doctora?
Yes, we already did before in 2 studies before, one done in Saudi Arabia and one done in Egypt here. Actually, the real world data is already existed in many hospitals, and the patient profile have a plenty of much data for the resource use, how much file he consumed, how much laboratory tests he done before. All these kind of data is already existed in many patient profile data and electronic medical records in many private hospitals. And regarding to your question, Dr. Omar, about the credibility of the real world evidence as a source of information in many health economic studies, actually there is a debate on such a topic, because many professors said that we are lowering evidence by using the real world data. But actually we are not lowering evidence. For example, for example, in rare diseases, when there is no randomized clinical trials to capture the effectiveness of these studies, we go for what? We go for other observational studies and other effectiveness studies to highlight the value of these orphan drugs. So we are not lowering evidence. We use the credible source of information, the local source of information to rely on and to inform the payers and decision makers. So we are not lowering evidence. We are relying on a much evident local data that can help us visualize the real value of this product in this specific country or in a specific country. So this is very important to highlight and very important to invest in such data, because as you see, every day there is many technologies arise to the market. There is many technologies, many innovative treatments, and many expensive treatments that actually need to be evaluated by using real world data. So I think it's very important to highlight this topic and highlight this issue.
Thank you, Dr. Rajan. I just received another question about can we consider the course for real world evidence? You just mentioned Dr. Jahan right now in the slide. So is it a credible source for the real world evidence and the data generation of social media? The question for Mr. Douglas or Dr. Jahan even.
You go first. I have a couple of comments.
Okay, please, Dr. Jahan, start.
Okay, no problem. Actually, yes, it's a credible source of information. We collect these data and put it in our models because it's, as I said, it's very important to highlight or to go for the real world data, for the real life data that actually represent our local context. And besides getting this data and put it in our models or in our cost effectiveness model, we can also make a trial-based economic evaluation. Trial-based economic evaluation, it's something like an effectiveness studies. We collect cost data from the beginning beside the effectiveness data. So we have both. We have the cost data and the clinical data. And I think this will be I know more expensive than the modeling studies and the more than the cost effectiveness studies, but this is not done in all the cases. This is done in special cases when actually there is a lack of data. There is a lack of specific important data regarding the resource use, or there is something like a debate between different products, or there's actually example in rheumatoid arthritis. We have many innovative treatments and many branded drugs in rheumatoid arthritis, and all the clinical evidence said that they are equally effective. They are equal to each other. They are similar to each other in their efficacy. Okay, so what about the resource use? What about the follow-up needed to follow those patients? What about the doses already consumed or the vials consumed? This is very important data that we need to highlight and we need to measure in order to obtain the most cost-effective medication.
I wanted to just
Mr. Douglas, please.
Yeah, just very quickly that on the social media side, we're seeing, especially in Western countries, the United States, elsewhere, a huge use of social media from the standpoint of patient outreach. But even not even there, just even in Africa, for example, I have examples of using Facebook as a connection point between the caregivers and the patients, because they're part of a community and they have a kind of a community network through a Facebook platform, and they trust people around them to help them with in guiding their health care. So Facebook Messenger becomes actually the connection point in many cases in sub-Saharan Africa between the caregiver and the patient. And that's a social media platform, not even designed for healthcare. But now I'm seeing a lot of bots that are being built into social media platforms to help, ask what your conditions are, to really try to understand a little bit of the diagnosis so that you can get then hopefully to the right caregiver. And so you're seeing this also being used by, for example, doctors remotely and so forth to really try to help triage patients is through rudimentary social media platforms. But to Dr. Diani's comment, we have a massive amount of information on these patients. We can directly see, for example, the study that we did on severe asthma. We can directly see, how these products are being administered, and then directly see how these patients' biomarkers are responding, and be able to see whether there's a mitigation of, for example, severe asthma. And this becomes very, very valuable, not just from the standpoint of HEOR, but really also really being able to prove value for care.
Thank you, Mr. Douglas. I have now another question from the attendee, one of the attendee, about to Dr. Musad, please, Dr. Musad. One is asking about how we can improve our knowledge about real-world evidence, and is there any training available in the region to get training about the real-world evidence and data generation?
Yes. So I'm happy to hear this question, because actually this is the future. I mean, an important part of the future. So yes, it's coming, as I said, and as we have heard during the session. I believe, yes, there are a lot of ways that you can, get the proper and the needed knowledge and in this regard. We have a lot of, several, service providers that can actually provide the service. In Ray, for instance, yes, of course, we have these kind of topics, also in collaboration with Dr. Jihan, and yeah, so this is a very good point, because actually we need we need to be in the region. We need to actually go forward with steps so that we are not far behind the experts. So okay, So yes, there are these topics, and you can contact us. Of course, it would be a pleasure, and we can provide that. So I have a question, Dr. Omar, to Mr. Drake. One simple question. Mr. Drake, I've talked to some, of the responsible persons for this topic. If we want to implement it in Egypt, for instance, or of the Arab world, for instance, there's a big concern when I talk to them. There is a big concern on the data privacy and access to
Sure.
data. When I said that, there is always this kind of, people need to know. So, for instance, even when I tell them, well, you will have a server, the server will be there in the hospital, nobody will have access to data.
Sure.
Not really very, very much, comfortable with that. So how can you assure them or prove to them that this is, because this, I believe, would be a main point in discussion. I don't know
Sure.
I don't know if also Dr. Fawaz is facing this, or Dr. Jihan have some, opinion about it.
So I think one of the best examples I have that is in Turkey, where we've actually been approved by the Ministry of Health in Turkey as a platform for doing exactly this. So we've set this up with, now almost 20 million patients in Turkey over a variety of different institutions, University of Istanbul, Kappa, and so forth, and very well respected, and so they understand, and we actually we're certified there, so that they understand, obviously, that when we're setting this up, it's internal to the hospital, and we're creating an anonymized version of that data that's actually patented and fully anonymized, so that there's no personal private information in that record that's in the database that we can query from outside. But then the other protection is that we're not bringing ever individual records out. We're bringing aggregate results, and this becomes important. So if I'm, for example, when I showed the cohort model, I'm not showing you an individual patient and saying, okay, here's, for example, a breast cancer patient, 35, 38. I'm telling you that, I have these number of patients that match this particular criteria. And if you recall the example on multiple myeloma, I'm still talking about an aggregate of patients. I'm saying, here's these patients, here's the most common treatments, here's the most common procedures, here's the most common medications, here's the most common comorbidities. But I'm talking to them as a patient group and never as an individual. And so that's one of the things that's really important, is working with this as an aggregate, to really start modeling that aggregate group and looking at that aggregate response to treatment as opposed to an individual patient. And that becomes also very important to also protecting and ensuring individual patient privacy. But that we can still see as an aggregate the efficacy of medication. So over time, I can see, for example, Dupilumab efficacy with asthma patients as an aggregate cohort over time, and show that obviously helps mitigate type 2 asthma attacks. And that becomes really the powerful aspect of this, is doing this anonymized, but also in aggregate. And that's one of the important factors of us, is that patient level data never leaves the hospital, always stays within the hospital.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Douglas, and I would like to thank all of the attendees for elongated, because actually it seems that it's interactive and very interesting. Dr. Jan, please go ahead.
Yes, I want to say that we have no choice to train or to have information about real world data or not, or health economics or not. I think it's must now. It's must now to have all the information about how to measure cost, how to measure outcomes, how to measure the real world data, the effectiveness data, because every day we have a new technology that actually pushes us to better estimate its efficacy data and its cost and its cost effectiveness. So I think it will not be a choice for us whether to have training on real world data or health economics or not. I think now it's a must. It's a language. Yeah. It's a very important language that we want all of us to talk it, because I think by actually establishing the risk-sharing agreements and the different models and the payment models and the dialogue shared between payers and decision and the pharma companies and the international organizations, I think to actually have a better dialogue, it's better to talk the same language, the science language. So this is the key message that I want to deliver to everyone.
Yes, and I also want to confirm or highlight that Dr. Jan is having a very strong experience in this field and having a wonderful program for training, and I believe we can actually get a lot of benefit out of her experience.
I want to add that we used to say that we're going to get digital. Now I think COVID has made us become digital.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, by the end, I would like to thank all the speakers, Dr. Mus'ab, Dr. Jihan, Dr. Fawaz, Dr. Douglas. I really appreciate your support in delivering the message in a very smooth way and a very nice way. And I would like to thank all the attendees for accepting the invitation and giving us this opportunity to share this information, and really waiting to see you again in a very soon another webinar. Inshallah, we'll try to make it soon in order to update on what is already happening and what is updated in this way. Thank you, and have a nice day, and wishing you all the best. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Omar.
Okay,
thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Recording stopped.